Over there playing the Battlefield theme, huh?
Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and this is Ready to Go Training. So today we're going to go over something that's kind of neat. This is essentially like a modernization attempt by Brownells, or rather sold by them and put together by PWS. I don't really have to go really hard into like the AR-18 or the BR-180's history and that kind of stuff, especially the action type. It doesn't come as a surprise to lots of people that essentially an amalgamation of the the Gewehr 43, forget exactly, gas system with a grease gun set of recoil springs and a short carrier with an AR bolt in it would turn itself into a decent overall operating system. What is kind of funny about it, obviously, and what a lot of people do talk about, is that this action type bolt carrier group, friggin' gas system, that kind of thing, has either been slightly modified and thrown into guns, wholesale copied and thrown into other guns, things like that. A lot of people already know this, especially a lot of guns that were involved in like the SCAR program, such as the SCAR itself, the G36. Later on, you see guns like the DeVore running around with it. The L85 is messing around with it and that kind of stuff. But the point is that this is a well-known action type. What is also fairly well known about it is that it was designed essentially to be a lesser, easier to manufacture or set up for AR, for not as well off financially anyway, countries. So this essentially is a modernization attempt, and they're kind of leaning on how good the action actually is, and they wanted to be able to slap it on AR lowers and that kind of stuff. So okay, no big deal there. I can certainly see that kind of thing, and I can certainly see a lot of people wanting to pick them up as like funsy guns or whatever. But eventually you're going to run into somebody that wants to use this as like a serious self-defense implement. Essentially, sling up a gun that was reliable enough could be different and usable as far as individual self-defense is concerned, because its weaknesses aren't translated as much to, for instance, like a home defense rifle, unless you go out and train with it a lot. But the weaknesses that you run into if you go out and train with it a lot are not as big of a deal, for instance, as like home defense implement, right? So let's talk about this really quick as far as like the reliability side of the house and that kind of thing. As far as my experiences with it, it did just fine. As far as day-to-day reliability, as far as accuracy, as far as heat buildup and all that, it's pretty predictably boring. In that the action type is pretty nice. It's a short stroke gas piston system that's out here, rather than an AR's DI configuration, air quotes, which acts more like a internal combustion engine piston. So as far as like weight and stuff, it's a little bit more nose heavy, not that big of a deal. It's a little bit, it gets hot a little faster, also not that big of a deal. I noticed something a little odd. And again, I'm already making it sound bigger than it is, but compared to like my mid-length AR and that kind of stuff out of a dual port muzzle brake and that kind of thing. And obviously I'm using cheap ammunition for training, because everybody is, especially now. But I noticed a little more flash coming out of the front end of this thing than I would my DI AR, and it's particularly loud when I'm trying to use night vision with it. Now, is that a big deal? No, it's not. And really, there could be, honestly, no difference between the two. I could have just ended up with a lot that had a messier burn cycle at the individual rounds, that kind of stuff. So I'm not counting that as like an issue. So, if we're just going to take it out, and if we're going to shoot it, and we're not going to go crawling through the mud with it and that kind of stuff, it does its job. It does do just fine. Ejection is a little weak with cheaper training ammo and that kind of stuff, and it's not that great with like military rated ammo and that kind of thing. But I personally don't care. As long as the casings get out of there and it continues to function, it's not something I'm going to turn into an issue. Something I did notice is quite unlike a lot of, for instance, like short stroke piston guns and that kind of thing. I noticed that with like steel cased ammo and that kind of stuff, if you lay off the bore bathing or the barrel extension spraying as far as like your wet lubes and that kind of stuff is concerned, because that's how you avoid that really is, you know, you get like a spray or a dropper of like wet lube that isn't like too terribly thick, and you get into the barrel extension, you cycle your action a bunch of times, and it keeps up the lubricity so that it doesn't get to the point where you have too much friction and then you have a stuck case. I noticed that with guns, as far as like the score and things like that, that problem is pretty much non-existent unless you have a fossil for the inside of the action. But I did notice that this guy had to be taken care of in the exact same way that a regular AR does. It caught me a little bit by surprise, but there again, no big deal. It's not really like a knock on the quality of everything that's put together here, because, you know, it did run just fine. You know, as far as the rail that's sticking up top, I didn't have issues holding zero with lasers or anything like that. But there again, you're not really going to run into issues running a laser on the 12 o'clock. I didn't really test the 3 or 9 or anything like that, because generally I run this guy up here and I tend to not mess with that. You know, I didn't have so much heat buildup up here, like even right over the top of like gas port, things like that, where I would run into electronics issues either. So yeah, it gets hot a little faster, but it's not like scalding, glow in the dark, holy crap, that's hot, kind of hot. So again, no big deal there. The thing is, though, is that as far as a serious self-defense implement, I'm going to give this a don't buy for everybody. And the reason why is not the fact that it ran just fine, it's not the fact that it's overpriced, significantly so, I personally believe. Because an upper, having looked on Brownells like 3 days ago, something like that, it's $800. Now, here's the thing about just the 180 AR-18 in general. It was made to be a cheaper alternative to the AR, understanding verifiably so that it wasn't going to be quite as good. So the fact that an upper is $800 is a lot. It's a lot to ask for. It's too much to ask for when that is the cost of a lot of BCM uppers and that kind of thing. And objectively, you know, standard gas system ARs, rifle length, carbine length, mid-length, as long as they're not put together by awful QC and that kind of thing, objectively it's better in every conceivable way. So that is something I'm not terribly fond of, is the fact that it's very much overpriced, but that's not even what ruins it for me. It's not the fact that, you know, you already had a weaker or lesser reliable or less hardy rifle with a giant E-port and a lot of access to the guts of your lower receiver, being now pinned onto essentially an AR lower, which is even more fragile than the AR-18's lower receiver as far as getting stuff in there and stopping your hammers from moving and that kind of thing. Although not by much, it's even more likely to have that kind of stuff happen. And to snap this on top of an AR, where, and I understand the theology behind it, but if they, you know, that does make it a lesser reliable rifle overall. But it's not the giant E-port or the fact that it's on an AR lower. I understand all those things. The issue that I personally have with it now, as far as people considering it for like a home defense implement and that kind of stuff, really is it's got a serious design flaw. Now, the original AR-18s and that kind of stuff would have folding stocks, and there would be like a tiny little cheap grommet in here that would hook into your stock to kind of hold it in place a little bit, and so you just kind of pulled it free. And that was in a lower receiver. This one is in the upper receiver. And for some of you that have seen people review these uppers before, you'll notice that the little rubber grommet is missing. That really isn't that big of a deal, frankly. But, you know, just heat buildup and clacking into stuff, it just ripped itself right off. The simple fact, however, that this is screwed into the upper receiver, and I'm going to cycle a photo in front here, but is also screwed into one of the guide rails for your bolt carrier that also separates, like they're two separate pieces. This is a rather large issue because they do detach. Like if you unscrew the screw and pull that apart, these things do detach. And here's the thing that I have with that. The carrier group on this is already a little short. And as you can actually see on the upper receiver and the carrier a little bit, the brass deflector is more or less here. Okay, and the carrier group is a little bit further forward. And you'll notice that there is a little bit of wear on there. And either that be from just how it's designed or whatever, that's not coming from cases. It's coming from the actual carrier moving a little bit inside of the upper receiver. Now, I personally don't care about the fact that the carrier moves a little bit on the inside of the upper receiver. All of them do. But the fact of the matter is that the carrier itself is short, and I'm going to put this photo up again, and that piece of guide rail for the carrier is detachable, and this is on a screw. Okay? And the simple fact that that's on a screw should tell you that, especially in like your training and that kind of stuff, screws that are on violently moving pieces of hardware are going to move. They're just going to move. Now, the guy that owns this had manually unscrewed this screw and confirmed that those two pieces do in fact move. And then he puts it back in place. He puts it back in place. He throws some Loctite in there. I believe it was blue or whatever. And that's fine. And then I proceeded to shoot round about 7,000 rounds through it. Yeah. It would have been less than that, but between the night vision shooting that you guys saw in the lead up to this, as well as a bunch of demos that I did for the Ohio class, we just petered right over 7,000 as far as round count. So, with that said, about 5-ish thousand rounds through that, I noticed that the screw itself was starting to come loose. This is just me, like, checking the actual upper receiver itself. I'm getting ready to go do a bunch of shooting. I'm making sure that everything is where it's supposed to be, and it did move a little bit. So that requires me to pull this thing apart. It requires me, I then put way too much red Loctite in there because I don't want it to move for me or him later, right? Let it cure, and then of course it did just fine after that. But the fact of the matter is that this does in fact do that. Now, it's sort of a bummer to me because it's a design flaw that will persist. And if you don't want it to persist, you're going to have to basically just throw a tiny spot weld in there and make sure that it won't move around ever if you intend on messing with it in that way, because there's no real reason for a section of the guide rail for your bolt carrier in your upper receiver to move or be detachable or any of that. There's no reason for that whatsoever, and all it really was for a non-locking crappy stop for a folding stock on the lowers that ship with these. That's not okay. It's not okay. And what bothers me is that from its original release, and the fact that it was a failed commercial design, it was one of those things where it's like, damn, you almost had a really, really good design, and that shows in how many people take it and copy it and do all kinds of stuff with it as far as its operating system is concerned. And this is exactly that, okay? Because it could have been more or less well enough left alone. You didn't have to worry about folding stocks, or even if you did, it really doesn't matter to have stocks fold over to one side. There's nothing for it to really press upon. I'm not really shooting something like this until bolt lock unless I'm messing around. There's no real control faces for a stock folding over and just touching this side to mess with. Friction lock or push locks and that kind of stuff, are not that difficult or hard to defeat. There's no reason for it at all, and you've already taken a almost fantastic design and you've made it worse. Now, it might look better because its upper receiver isn't spot welded to hell and back, like the original rifles were. It might look even more better because, an M-lock rail got thrown on there that actually screws itself into the barrel nut, which is really nice. And you can see that. The screws littered all over the friggin' thing. It might look better cosmetically, and as far as the modern world goes, it might function a little bit better too because I can throw a light or a laser on it or whatever, right? it might be a little more compatible with the modern world because, you know, it takes AR magazines or snaps to AR lowers and that kind of stuff. So you can use Geisleys and that kind of thing. But you've made the design, overall working design, worse. And it's unfortunate because it just makes the AR 180, AR 18, whatever it is that you want to call it, a continuous, almost. And that's sad. So I didn't really like doing this because I don't like beating on products, me personally. But I will say, because I've gotten a lot of questions from it, and I've gotten a lot of, you know, queries about people that that are bored essentially and want to go get a funzie gun, or whatever. Now, I'm not going to stop you or even try to stop you from getting a funzie gun or whatever. Just understand that this isn't a self-defense implement. This isn't a self-defense implement. And that's really what I'm saying here, is that you can turn a PSA into a self-defense implement, right? By every objective measure, that's a better rifle. If you get like a bunch of parts off of their site, piece them together yourself, because I wouldn't trust them to piece together things. But, you know, you get a bunch of parts kits from PSA, you put that thing together, and then you slowly upgrade it. Even from stage 1, that's a better rifle overall than this, because of that fact, frankly. You know, funzie guns or I'm bored guns because I already have stuff that works, yeah, knock yourself out. I'm not even going to try to stop you, because I will give it to it, you know, just like the original rifles. It shoots very, very, very flat, especially with a freaking muzzle brake on there. But I wouldn't consider it anything other than that. And that's messed up, you know, because there could, you know, if that one thing basically was ignored, if it wasn't turned into a detriment, because now you have, it's not a small section either, a rather large section of the front section of what's guiding your bolt carrier, which is short and likes to move in the upper receiver a little bit. If that wasn't basically detachable, it would be okay. You know, people that are like, hey, yeah, that's my home defense gun. I understand its limitations. I'm going to bring it out and train with it in class anyway. The one thing that I wouldn't be able to argue with is that it's got a rock solid action, modernized stuff that's on board. But I can't do that, and that sucks. So, you know, if you stuck to the end of this, you're a freaking champion. If you got opinions on it or whatever, you can throw that in the comment section. If you want to check us out on Patreon, Facebook, the new friggin' nerd YouTube channel that I'm starting up, links for all that are in the description below. You know, as far as Patreon goes, if you want to throw a couple bucks at us to see if we can, you know, help you out with more reviews and that kind of thing, or if you want to get something out of it by spending $41 a month and coming out and training with us as much as you want to, then, you know, again, knock yourself out. I am slowly adding to the course schedule over time here. I just added a brand new Ohio set. I'm looking at places like Pennsylvania. I am talking to people in Georgia. I'm getting ready to schedule a bunch of stuff as far as all that's concerned. I'm going to Mississippi for a handgun set here in a little while. So, you know, check all that stuff out. Website link obviously is in the description below. So, that's all I got, guys. Remember, regular guy's firearm is the last defense. Tyranny, be easy.